Let's record.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. I don't believe we've met before.
Hi, I'm Peter.
Julia.
Hi, Julia.
Nice, Julia. Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
We can go on the room's good. Lights. Camera. Action. See the back ones. Can you do the lights?
Can you even work the light switch in this room?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great. That's fine. You can all see. Thank you so much. Well, at last, new technology. Welcome everybody to the CMEI event. As I think everybody in this room knows, I'm Helen Hayes. I'm one of the co-conveners of the Civic and Moral Education Initiative. I'm very pleased to see you at this session today. I'm extremely pleased to welcome Carla Miller. I met Carla about a year ago. Carla's a network fellow at the Safra Center, and we found we had many interesting thoughts and ideas and concerns in common. So we had most of you had many conversations. I'm delighted that she said she would come and talk about her very much on the ground experiences, which are also both very challenging and also often quite amusing. So she'll tell you what it's like to be at the cutting edge of the coalface of working in government ethics. And as she said, it's pretty good, pretty bad, and pretty ugly. Our commentator will be Matthew Shaw, who I'm sure you know. I'll just briefly summarise it because of time, just briefly give a little bit of information about the bios of both Carla and Matthew. Carla has a law degree from the University of Florida. She's a member of the Florida Bar and also the Australian Bar. She's a former federal prosecutor for the Middle District of Florida. She's the founder and president of City Ethics, a non-profit that provides ethical resources for governments across the world, including China, Africa, and the Middle East. And as a currently network fellow at the Edmund J. Safra Center, she's piloting an ethics training program with the Massachusetts Ethics Committee. And just briefly to remind you, Matthew Shaw is a doctoral student up here, and he also is a lawyer. He clerked with the United States District Judge and practiced civil and criminal law in Atlanta. He holds a Juris Doctor from Columbia University, a Master's Education from Harvard Bachelor of Arts in Romantic Languages and History from the University of North Carolina. So he considered an absolutely excellent person to comment on Carla's presentation. Carla, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for coming to talk about government ethics. I'm really honored to be at the School of Education because I come from a family of educators. My dad is a university professor. My mother was in early childhood education when it was just starting. And my sister's in special education. And I used to always say, well, I'm not in education, I'm the lawyer in the family. I'm the lawyer in the family. And as it turns out, in working in government ethics, education has become the forefront of what I work in. So I guess it's in my blood, and so I feel like I'm in the right place in the School of Education. What I'd like to talk to you today about, first of all, a little bit of the background, and then my journey with all of the pitfalls of what happens when you try to reform government ethics. Core problems that I've picked up from being in the field, and potential solutions, because I don't want to just hang here with potential problems, I want to actually have the solutions. So first of all, a little bit on background. The Safra has an objective of getting a set of practical tools that institutions can use to understand the problem of institutional corruption and to respond to it. So I use that for my objective, which is to produce a set of practical tools for municipal governments. So all of the work of the lab, I'm trying to translate into what can we do with local governments to improve them. Now there's 39,000 local governments in the United States, but I'm not going to try to do something with all of them. I focused on the 289 cities that have over 100,000 people. And so that's the target group, and they're all evolving ethics programs and trying to do something about corruption. And it's a little sporadic right now on how they're doing things. Now, Larry Lessig, he's the director of the center, he has a book called Republic Lost, and he says the challenge for all of us is to bring around a movement for solutions, pulling together academics and activists. And so I'm in the activist category, a lot of you are in the academic category. We need both of us to join forces. Now, government corruption, is this a problem? I want to go over this really fast, because I think we can all assume that it is. But we do not have to belabor this point, but trust in government is at an all-time low, and there's a lot of studies that reflect this. And when I go and talk to people, I say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you trust Congress? And then people always, someone raises their hand, they say, well, how about 0? You said 1 to 5, but what about 0? I was like, okay, what about 0? 0 in there. All-time lows. A little bit higher at the local level, which is my theory that, going in and trying to change Congress, good luck. Maybe at the local level, we still have a chance to affect some change because people still have a little bit of trust left in their local governments. Now, trust in the federal government going down in all kinds of surveys, but here's a survey I just found. What do you have a higher opinion of, Congress or cockroaches? And they actually were taking likes and dislikes and comparing different things. Cockroaches liked more than Congress, slightly beat out Congress. And then, do you have a higher opinion of Congress or Ebola? Now, Congress did win that one. Congress won that one. But this kind of shows the lack of respect that we have for our governmental institutions, which is not good in a democracy, as you all know. So there's a national government ethics study that just came out, and it's really interesting. This is a little bit better than comparing it to cockroaches, but this study showed that levels of corruption at the local government level are extremely high, and the pressure to commit misconduct is growing. But here's the really interesting part. The clearly illegal, stupid stuff is on the decline. But the technically legal conflicts and abuse of power on the increase. And that's what we would call corruption, but it's technically legal. But that's on the increase. Now, Dr. Bill English is now the director over at the lab, and he has a wonderful paper called Institutional Corruption and the Crisis of Liberal Democracy. And I read, it's a 40-page brilliant paper if you get a chance to read it. And at the end, he basically sums it up saying we're in crisis. And our institutions are increasingly corrupted. And our government is fragile, and its demise is more likely than not. Now that is alarming. It's alarming for all of us. And so what do we do about it? We have two choices. I've narrowed it down to two choices for this. Quit or keep trying. Now, obviously, since I'm standing here talking to you, I am in the keep trying category here. I want to do something to reverse the decline in American government. So how to fight? Again, remember, it's going to take the academics and the activists working together. We can't do it separately. We've got to join forces here. And this is, Helen, I have your picture up here. I was reading one of Helen has many brilliant articles, but there was one I was reading about all of us being either passive recipients of knowledge or tool users. And a tool user would get awareness through actual contact with the issue. And I really liked that feeling, instead of having information just kind of drumming out to you and you're just kind of absorbing it in a passive way, that you actually can start using tools and affecting change. And when it talks about awareness through actual contact, let me tell you, I have been like picked up and I was thrown against a wall for some of the stuff I've done in my city government. So I have actual contact with this issue, and I hope that I've had some awareness as a result of that. There's also another interesting study from Francisca Gino from the business school, and it's called Newcomers' Authentic Self-Expression. And what she talks about is, when you have people giving you lectures and you wonder, like, who is that person and why are they doing what they're doing? Why do they care? Why do they care about this? And she said the key, and it's a brilliant, brilliant study, but it's not just what you're doing, really, in any of our endeavors. but it's who you are and why you're doing it. So if you indulge me a little bit, I want to tell you about my journey. My dad had a midlife crisis and decided to get his doctorate. And I was a senior in high school, and he dragged us. I was in a private school in Philadelphia, and he took us to Tallahassee, Florida. Good for him. So he could get his doctorate. I was freaked out. You know, this was like a major shift. And we moved in, and all of a sudden, I realized that we were in a different environment. And, you know, I couldn't quite pick it up. I was 16 at the time. But it was the land of Southern belles. And, you know, if you're from the South or you have any experience.
What year was this?
1967. Year of Southern belles. I have stories about this, but there was a definite cultural way that you're supposed to act. Well, I tried. I did. I got dressed up like a Southern belle. That's the senior prom. You know, you get dressed up as a Southern belle, and your date gets dressed up in a Confederate uniform. And I thought, surely there's something wrong about this. I'm only 16. What's going on here? And so there's a breakaway time, which is a divergence or radical, note the word radical, change from something established or long-standing. So this is what I shifted to from my Southern belle demeanor. And I started taking a look at the Vietnam moratorium and fighting against the war. And my father was upset. He said, "You don't respect President Nixon." You know. And I said, "No, I don't. You know, we have to stop the war in Vietnam." And getting involved in the very beginnings of the women's liberation movement, which was really interesting. And the American Civil Liberties Union for student rights across the country, and also the 26th Amendment to the Constitution that gave 18-year-olds the right to vote. And of course, in Tallahassee, they weren't going to give 18-year-olds the right to vote because we were college students. And so we protested that through the ACLU and got the right to vote, which changed all the elections in Tallahassee. But anyhow, what I learned was that government was not perfect, obviously, and that there were inequities that adversely affected people, in fact, hurt them, harmed people, and that people can be mobilized to fight for a change. And when they're educated as to the issues, they will actually come out and you can win on these issues. But it takes a lot of citizen organization to get that done. Now, this caused problems in my family because my dad was trying his doctorate. He wanted me to be quiet. And, you know, I was an activist. I was an activist. And so I recently found a letter he wrote to me. And the letter, he tried really hard. It's a brilliant letter. I cried when I read it because he's saying, you know, I get it. You're 20. You want to change the world. Yeah, but wait until you get like 30 or 40, and then you lose your dreams and you start worrying about paying your mortgage. So have fun while you can this year. Have a lot of fun. Get it out of your system. Going, geez, that sounds a little depressing, you know. So this quote kind of encapsulates that feeling, and it's the youth gets together his materials to build a bridge to the moon, or a palace or temple on earth. And at length, the middle-aged man concludes to build a woodshed with them. And that is, I think, like a very strong underlying feeling that people have, that you can do this when you're young, but you give it up. So their goals for me: marry a lawyer, buy a house, have children, and make money. That's like the condensation of their goals. Here's my goals: become a lawyer and change the world. So that is basically why I'm still doing. Dad, you know, who has, he passed away when I was in law school. I'm at the Harvard School of Education, and I still have my dreams, and I still want to change the world, and you can do it at any age and at any decade. Now, as a bridge to the moon, I started as a federal prosecutor. I chaired our Citizen Ethics Commission. I wrote codes. I became an ethics officer, all as a volunteer. And I've trained thousands of people across the country on ethics. So that led to the formation of City Ethics, which is a website that all the cities go to get information for free to help them build their ethics programs. And I'd like to acknowledge my husband, Donald McClintock, who actually built this website 10 years ago when it was a really novel thing, and he's done all of the IT work to get this to be the go-to source for municipalities in ethics. So City Ethics has national resources for cities, a handbook, model ethics code, daily blog on events, and we're really trying to build up the education of people in the field, including condensing research from all the academics and putting it into like a format that people can pick up in the field. So, 2, the journey with pitfalls. Here's me as a brand new baby federal prosecutor, and they said, your first case, here's a big file, it's against the President Pro Tem of the Florida Senate for mail fraud and extortion. I said, I thought you started me like drunk driving cases or something, you know, on the Navy base. Can you no, this is your prosecution. So this is Senator Dan Scarborough, who was convicted through an FBI sting investigation. We had about 20 investigations into corruption, local corruption in our government. And so I got to know the seedy side of our local government politics, which is not unusual in this country. This was his obituary. You don't hear those exercises like, what would your obituary read? You know, how do you want it to read? This is how his read. Once Florida's most powerful senator until his political career ended with a 1982 conviction for mail fraud and extortion. You never can escape that, of course. And so this is like institutional corruption, Florida style, and this is how things run. And when you try to disturb that, that's where there's some problems. But I thought, you know, if we just had ethics training, you know, if we just rounded up these people and we told them to be good, that they would get it and we wouldn't see them in federal court. You know, so those were my early days of thinking that that would work. So I actually, in 2007, was asked to come in and be the ethics officer for the city. And I thought, well, I can't be running this website and talking to people around the country if I don't roll up my sleeves and go in and build a city program. So I went in thinking, okay, I'm going to do some ethics training here. This will work. I know it'll work. And the first thing I got hit with, they held up my appointment for 3 months. We don't need an ethics officer and we don't need training. We don't need it. We are ethical people. You have insulted us. Now, there was the FBI investigation going on into the city, grand jury investigations, and the paper was having, you know, big headlines saying, what do you mean you don't need ethics training? You don't need an ethics officer. You know, the FBI is all around. That might be a clue. So anyhow, after 3 months, I came in and I was confirmed as ethics officer. So the first thing I did was December, I thought I'm going to do training on gifts because I know that they just want to know what the laws are on gifts. If I just tell them, you know, there's a $100 limit. So I had this group and one woman raises her hand and she says, are you telling me that I'm going to take a gift from over $100 from a lobbyist? Are you telling me that? And I said, well, yeah, I'm telling you that. And she said, well, this is going to be a really lousy Christmas. Yeah. I get it. And then I noticed that the lobbyists were all registering. You know, they're supposed to register to give transparency to citizens. So they were registering name of your client, various, type of issue, numerous. You know, and I went, this can't be the right answer. You know, so I thought, well, what they need is training. You know, they need training on how to fill these forms out. No, they didn't need training. They didn't want to fill the forms out. They didn't want to disclose. But I thought, okay, we're going to start with training. And all of our ethics code regulations on lobbying came under attack. And the paper got behind it, of course, but you know, it was very clear that they were subverting the intent of the law. And so you'd think, you know, finally they all declared their clients, and I thought, good win at the beginning for the ethics office. I was called into the mayor's office. I thought maybe to congratulate me for, no. I was called in that I had upset the lobbyist community. And could we defer it for another year because they wanted to help rewrite the laws on the lobbyist regulations. And I thought, are you kidding me? You know, you want them to rewrite the laws and not to comply now? Well, you know, we got a lot of pushback on following our law that exists. And, you know, so yeah, this was revealing to me. I had a hotline, so people were calling in on corruption. So I look at it from the viewpoint of being a former federal prosecutor, and I go in and I try to get it handled. Well, one of the things was close to a $1 billion garbage deal. And this was being kind of sneaked through our city council for $1 billion, $750 million, and a 40-year term, quietly. So I held a big meeting about it. Well, when you hold big meetings and you make a deal that's close to $1 billion transparent to the public to start scrutinizing, it's not a very popular thing to do, is all I can say. And I, of course, got called in again on, you're not getting the picture here of what we want you to be doing. I thought you wanted me to keep the FBI out of here and keep things from being prosecuted. Of course, the paper was always supportive for oversight for the public. And if it hadn't been for the press, I'll tell you what, I would have been put in a closet. You would have never seen me again because the press was on top of it to make sure that the citizens were getting the transparency. But again, caused problems. And I come home at the end of the day and I'd be shaking, you know, and people were mean to me. And I won't go into the details here, but it was not pretty. And my husband would greet me at the door and I'd say, I don't think I can do this anymore. This is not pleasant. He said, okay, sit down, I'll make you a good meal, and you're going back. He kind of gave me that impetus to go back and keep up the fight. Then I got an issue with the Super Bowl committee asking for close to $2 million more. Well, I mean, there could be reasons for that. Unfortunately, they never disclosed what they did with the money. It just disappeared. And so I raised that issue, like, how can you take $1.8 million from the taxpayers? If you hit football in the South, you have done a bad thing if you start questioning where that money went. But I questioned where it went because I thought, how can you take that from the taxpayers? So I saw that there was a culture clash. It wasn't really ethics education, really, like the Pollyanna viewpoint in the beginning, no. It had to do with the culture that I found myself in, and I was trying to fight it, but it was not with ethics education that we were going to get there. And I'll show you something about ethics culture that I think is interesting. This is a Christmas present for my husband, and this is an ethics code, and it talks about our values: respect, integrity, communication, excellence. Fantastic, expensive ethics education program. You know where this is from.
Christmas present too, I thought.
Pardon?
I thought it was a good Christmas present.
Yes, it was a good Christmas present. Some people get jewelry, some people. I get collector's items from eBay. Where do you think this is from? Enron. So they had a great ethics program. Really, they did. They were locked in a little room somewhere, printing out brochures like that and slick little things that they could hand out. Apparently, though, it wasn't getting to the people to shift the culture. So the real key in ethics education and government, of course, is you have to shift the culture. You can't just keep cramming more information into their heads. They're not getting it. They're not getting it. So, of course, my budget comes around, and you can imagine what happens. It's like, we really don't need this ethics officer. They didn't even tell me that my budget was up for a discussion. Anyhow, so the entire, a lot of people came to fight for the ethics office of the city. The press did, citizen groups did, the League of Women Voters, the Tea Party, everybody came and said, you can't cut the ethics office. And so the budget was put back in. But I thought, enough is enough. I was reporting to the mayor. That is not good. And I thought, I need to report to the people. We need to come up with an independent solution. And so I gathered up all the citizen groups in the city and the press, and we fought for ethics reforms to give a more independent structure that directly reported to the citizens, where I could not get the kind of pressure that I was getting. And so we moved on and mobilized in the community. That's like a whole story. How do you get people who have lost their hope that anything can happen in our government? How do you mobilize them so that they have a little bit of hope left that they can make a change? And when that bill passed, we had from right to left and in the middle, like about 150 citizens sitting in our city council chambers And they all felt like they had a piece in changing the law that gave them more accountability for their government. I mean, really, I was almost in tears. I thought, we can actually shift things like this. It was exciting. And so, talked about the city moving to a new era of ethics. So now when I call up some of the people and I say, I got a hotline call, and here's what we need to do. And they say, yes, ma'am. And it's like, we cannot call her into the mayor's office and put pressure on her anymore because she answers directly to the people. So that's the solution, and that's the solution through citizen referendums we're taking throughout the country through an organization called Represent US. And of course, there's a Cambridge group here that's working on this, and so if any of you want to get involved right here in Cambridge, there is a movement to get independent oversight. Number 3, after going through all of that, what kind of challenges, I don't want to call them problems really, have I seen? What kind of challenges do we have with government ethics training? And so I tried to condense the problems and the challenges for you. And the first one is the level of ethical competency of government workers. Now, we are getting people in that have had no civics education at the high school level, really at the entire educational level, not even at the college level. They're coming in, they don't know about civil discourse, they don't know about moral reasoning, they do not know about that. So they're coming in there and they're saying, I go to church, that's all I need to know. Don't need to know about any of this other civic stuff. So the moral and ethical competency of our government workers is not very high. And I'm sure there's been studies on that, probably from this very building people have worked on that. It's not high. Problem number 2, we get people that come in and they already are ethical. And isn't it insulting to come in front of the ethics officer to be told about ethics? They're offended. And you know how hard it is from an educational standpoint to teach something to someone when they can't hear it. They already know it. That's going to be a block to them absorbing the information. They also don't understand the difference between virtue ethics and government ethics. It's all like clumped together. Problem 3, lawyers run government ethics. This is a problem. Now it's a challenge. I'll frame it as a challenge, but lawyers, government lawyers, city lawyers are the ones that round everybody up, and they're in charge of ethics education and ethics training. Now what does that mean? What's their training approach? Is it based upon philosophy, psychology, all of the research coming out on behavioral ethics? How about education? Neuroscience? Evolutionary biology? How about an integration model of all of those? What are they using? The legal approach. This is what they're using. Now here's how it goes. We don't know how to do it. You give people something like that on PowerPoint and you hand it out and you go over all of the laws that relate to them in detail. Think of how much fun that is, and so you go over that, then you have PowerPoints that look like that, and you read them to everybody. And then you get them to sign a statement that they read and understood everything that you gave them and attest to it. Oh, and I'm looking at them, I'm thinking, you're all lying. Because I know you didn't understand all of that. And then you give them a certificate of completion. And I found the certificate of completion, this actually was signed by Rod Blagojevich when he was governor. But anyhow, so people go out of ethics training, you can imagine how warm and fuzzy they feel after their government ethics training. It's called the gotcha system. Okay, you stringed out all those laws. Now we're kind of walking on eggshells because we don't know if we're going to break any of those laws. And we're really worried about it. And it's called the gotcha system because they don't really understand what you told them at all. And the research clearly shows that compliance systems, like what we're talking about, the primary danger is people think less about doing the right thing and they focus on the cost and benefits of non-compliance. And they game the system. So that's what we've pushed government people into doing. Now, there was another study that just came out last year from the Safra Lab on do ethics commissions reduce political corruption? We're putting hundreds of millions into them. Do they reduce political corruption? Now, you can imagine what the results of the study are. The study says, no. We've got all these ethics commissions across the country, and they have weak and possible perverse effects on public corruption. But it's possible that they serve a symbolic purpose. Oh, great. We've got a symbolic purpose. But that's not helping to fight the corruption that we need to fight. The research also shows that you need to train using examples of good ethical behavior, not scare people with punishment all the time. You're going to get more effective training if you treat people more humanely. Problem number 4, the government ethics training is not research-based. Maybe somewhere in the country, some renegade is doing this, but I can tell you from looking at programs across the country and researching what's going on, all of these wonderful materials, like Helen introduced me to the Journal of Moral Education. I wanted to read every single article in there. It was brilliant. You know, I thought this directly impacts on my work, but it's not like any of us in the field read that. Helen's article on deconstructing the elephant, moral foundations research, blind spots, happiness hypothesis. I mean, these are brilliant resources that could make ethics training in governments effective, but they're not getting out to the people that are actually doing the government. That's the problem. Problem 5 is definitional. You can't fight what you can't define. And you can't train unless you can define what you're training on, obviously. But what's happened in government ethics is there's a complete collapse of the concepts of ethics, laws, and corruption. They're all just jumbled into one big concept. And I'll show you like the 3-bucket theory that I use to train people on this so that they actually get that everything isn't equal to everything else. And we have ethics, corruption, and laws. And I go through basically separating them out for people because they are different buckets. And we have ethics that private virtue is not necessarily public virtue. They're different creatures, and that's from Dennis Thompson, who started the Ethics Center at Harvard. Very important key, because people come in and say, look, I go to church all the time. I've got good parents. I know all this stuff. Really, your parents taught you about nepotism and not hiring your relatives? I don't think so. So they don't get that there's a whole different field. Government ethics being the ethics of the institution and standards that make officials more accountable to the public. Now, corruption, they really don't get this, and I think public officials have a problem with this. And that is, you've got personal corruption and institutional corruption. Personal corruption, we could use Rod Blagojevich again, someone that just knew what they were doing and took bribes and, they're corrupt. But then we have people doing fancy deals and maneuvering the law for their own personal benefit, but they've checked it out with the lawyers ahead of time, and it's technically legal. That doesn't mean they're not corrupt. It just means that what they've done doesn't fall into a crime. So we have a lot of people, that's what's on the increase, the technically legal crime. So institutional corruption being a different concept, like typically when you think the word corruption, you think of old-time gang, organized crime, suitcases full of money. I actually had a case with someone who had a suitcase of money, he was bribing someone, but that's the classic corruption. This is the definition of institutional corruption from the Harvard lab that we've been working with the last 5 years and studying, as influences that shift priorities, that weaken the organization and weaken public trust, but they're legal. You see the important distinction here. And this is the gaming of the system that we see in Congress. And when I saw that definition, it was exciting because I finally could name what I was seeing in my local government. And the way Larry Lessig describes this is, imagine that as a public servant, your allegiance is true north to the citizens. Well, what happens in institutional corruption is you have forces like a magnet that pull you off of true north. And you can't even see anymore what you're supposed to be doing on behalf of the citizens. So just the last challenge is probably the most important problem. Extremely significant that there is a lack of purpose for ethics training. And it's more than just red tape and checking the box. Dennis Thompson from Harvard says the purpose of government ethics is to educate public employees about their important role in American democracy. If they personally benefit from holding a public position, it leads to unfairness and a breakdown of our democracy. And that is the purpose, and no one sees that purpose when they're sitting in there being crammed full of the laws. So if you can pull them up out of thinking that it's just purely legal technicalities, and to the real purpose it helps. And I'll just go over potential solutions just to mention to you. We can discuss it if you want to, but I think hope, inducing hope into people that we can actually reverse this is extremely important because our citizens have lost hope. 2 parts for hope: expecting the positive outcomes and then having pathways. So that's what I've been working on with some academics to develop those pathways. Pilot project with the Massachusetts Ethics Commission has been in the last year. Massachusetts trains 400,000 public servants a year in ethics. So we're working with them and putting together a framework that can be exported across the country, using the purpose of government ethics and their vulnerability to blind spots. City Ethics is doing a curated website where we're taking the brilliant research that's being done across the country and we're putting it into a framework that practitioners can use. I recommend Ethics Unwrapped as great videos. They're open source. You can download them. They're brilliant. Ethics Unwrapped from the University of Texas. And again, the reform will need academics and activists working together. And I'm working right now with Mary Gentili from Babson College. She has a brilliant program called Giving Voice to Values, and we're putting together a program for municipal governments on purpose and why they would want to know ethics to begin with. So is there any hope? Yes, I think there's hope. I will think there's hope until the day I die. So hopefully, you will have increased hope. And to give that to you, I just want to share something with you. This is the Athenian Oath, which is thousands of years old. And when men, only men, in Athens turned 18, they would stand in front of the temple, with their full armor and their shield and their sword, and they would take an oath to be citizens of Athens. And it was thought that you had to be educated into being a citizen. And if you did not take this oath, there was a word for you. But here's the oath. We will never bring disgrace on this our city by an act of dishonesty or cowardice. We will revere and obey the city's laws. We will strive increasingly to quicken the public sense of civic duty. Thus, in all these ways, we will transmit the city not only, not less, but greater and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. And there was a word for those people that did not take this oath. And the word is idiot. And so I ask people when I talk in groups, like, do you want to be an idiot? No, you want to have civic education so that you know about this because you don't want to be an idiot. But basically an idiot was someone self-centered. And they were concerned with their private affairs as opposed to public. And it was considered in Athens that in democracy, idiots were born and citizens were made through education. So truly that's our goal in education, to build citizenship, and this is what we're doing in government.
Thank you, Carla. And I ask Matthew to comment. We have discussion afterwards.
Thank you, Carla, so much for your presentation. I thought it was very riveting, very interesting, your take on the legalistic ways that we tend to provide ethics education, some of the pitfalls and problems with those. What was really fascinating was how you framed the question in that most people believe themselves to be ethical. It's true. I can think of many examples, including of lawyers. When you made that reference, I was thinking of the professional responsibility exam that every law student has to take, that no law student studies for, and that half of law students fail. And they fail precisely for the reasons that you indicated, that there are differences between personal ethics and institutional ethics, between codes of conduct and how we morally behave. So one of the questions I had during your presentation is, who empowers the dispersal of this type of ethics education that you're developing? One of the major questions that I had was how reliant upon the culture of the citizenry is the success of your ethics program. because you don't have any formal structural mechanisms. So typically we tend to think of structural or cultural explanations, but I'm somewhat of a sociologist. So we think of structural and cultural explanations for why certain phenomena happen, or structural and cultural ways to change those. You mentioned the cultural ones, turning ethics over to the citizens, involving the citizens directly. But in a representative democracy, one would think that the representatives themselves, be they city council people, be they congressmen, be they senators, serve that function. If these are the very people who are likely to become corrupt, if administrators and bureaucrats are the same, then that of course fails. But culturally, what was happening there that needs to be replicated elsewhere in order for your project, which relies so heavily on citizens, who have to be educated in some way, to take off. Second piece that was fascinating was the role of information. Begs the question, how much of the support or lack of support that we're seeing, how much of the perception, because we think, at least now that it's a perception, that we are in a much less governmental ethics time, is based on proliferation of information. Because now that you have the internet, you have 24-hour news cycles. You have an uninterrupted flow of information. I can read in one day about the Department of Justice releasing the Ferguson report. I can also read about the judge in Pennsylvania who was sentenced to 30 years for having engaged in what most people would accept as corruption in sentencing young boys to jail. I can read about Governor Blagojevich. I can read Wikipedia and synthesize all this together. I can read about Governor McConnell. I can read about the Atlanta Public Schools crisis to bring something home to education. But some of this, and we often debate this in educational circles, could be a function of saturation. How much bad information are we saturated by? How much information are we not getting about the good that happens in our public sphere, be it the individual caseworker or be it as large as, you know, what happened to Secretary of State, not using governmental emails. So in addition to the form, the structures, the information that people are receiving is really important. And this is important because the same information conduits that are transmitting so much negativity, I would imagine, should be used and probably will have to be to transmit the type of citizen education necessary for this project to grow to scale. I have a few other things that I'd like to comment on, but those are the big three that jumped out at me.
Thank you. Right, well, we have opportunity for questions and comments to Carla and also to Matthew, who made some very important points. Yes, Jan,
One of the things that I found so alarming was that you said so many people were government have no actual civics education, which I find horrific. You know, when they think about cutting programs, the first thing they cut is, you know, the arts and civics, like how to be a citizen. And I try not to be dystopian or perverse, but I'm thinking there's a great way to manipulate people if they don't understand how their government works, if they don't understand the power that they have. They may, as you mentioned, with having overwhelmingly negative stories. Like, just go on Yahoo page, all the stories are like negative, negative, negative. You get so despairing that you feel like there's a sense of hopelessness so that you don't have any power. And I think as a technical person, I'm thrilled that 4 million people crashed the FCC server to say, we'll have net neutrality so that we can continue. So the people spoke and forced a former lobbyist for the companies to change his mind. And I think that was a great, obvious answer when the people spoke, even though it's not around ethics, but when people rising up and saying, we have the power to change things. And I don't see enough examples of that. But what can one do when so many communities, including the larger, are cutting at junior or high school level basic civics, especially for people who want to work in government?
Well, in Florida, they just passed a new law putting mandatory civics education into all of the high schools and leading it through all of the different subjects. So I think, again, if citizens start demanding it and they get a champion, they'll actually be able to pass the laws and put that into place, because we certainly need it.
So building on that question, so this seems to take, again, a very legalistic view of what civics education is. I imagine that the curriculum is prescriptive. One must teach about state governments in this way, or federal governments in this way, certain administrative bureaus in another way. But that doesn't necessarily get us to the sense of civic duty that's necessary for your ethics project to really take root. If the issue is government officials, bureaucrats, and either elected, either bureaucrats, if it's the issue of they're not having adequate civic education, is it that they don't understand how government functions, or is it that they don't have the sensibility of what? I'm hesitating about whether to say whether something is good or not, because that's more qualitative than ethical, but I also don't want to use the word ethics too much. What's appropriate behavior versus behavior that borders on corruption? Because most of what we've talked about, especially with institutional corruption, are things that are very much in the gray area. To use the APS example, yes, most people agree that it is bad to cheat on tests. But what if the teachers don't participate in the cheating, if they lose their jobs, there are no teachers remaining, because the APS already has a difficult time hiring teachers. Teachers that are most likely to be removed are the ones serving in low-income areas where there already is overcrowding due to the low number of teachers who want to come. So there's often balances, there are often trade-offs. There are people who have strong personal ethics, even people who understand institutional ethics, who in a given situation might choose a different path, and it might not be for necessarily corrupt reasons, though it may be illegal.
You know, I would say that the Florida education is not prescriptive and alone, because that would be pretty useless, just getting people to memorize a bunch of facts about government. But it does go into the areas of how do you have a civil discussion about issues, and how do you actually raise the issues? How do you become involved as a citizen and get them involved in that type of activity? They herd all of the high school students into city council meetings, and they get them to make a statement, and they practice those skills. So it's more than just shoving more laws in at them. And I would say that probably the biggest problem, you would hope, and I'm such an optimist, you would hope that all of our elected officials come in and they just want to do the right thing and they can figure out how to do the right thing. I would hope that too, but it doesn't work that way. And I think the main deficit is the psychological barriers that people have in being able to look at their own behavior and really analyze it effectively, because they have blind spots and they have biases that they don't even know. So one of the most promising things I think in ethics education I found when I talk to elected officials is telling them about those biases. And they go, really? We're not bad people when we make a mistake? It could be that all we need to do is talk to someone before we make a decision. So I think that that's our biggest avenue for change in ethics education.
Yes.
I think you're doing a wonderful bottom-up effort to bring positive change. I'm wondering if you want to apply this for countrywide, and I'm sure there are many initiatives. There are so many challenges because the context is so important. What applies to housing in Florida is very different from what applies on the challenges that there are in other parts of the country. So if you could hear, if you tell us a bit about how you would address that.
Okay, and the question was about extrapolating the techniques that we have in Florida on a global scale. How do you do that?
Like countrywide.
Countrywide.
Like state laws which are different. Okay.
Everybody's different. But see, that gets into what you were discussing, is the complexity of it. And I know so much on the internet, and there's so many anti-corruption tools, and the complexity of it stops people in their tracks. So I think that, and I've worked in China and also in Africa and in Iraq, and people in all of those areas still want to be able to address their government, and they want to have, more than anything, a way to bring up problems like through whistleblowing and hotlines, and they want to make sure that it's handled correctly. They don't really want to know a whole lot about their individual governments because they've got their own lives to run, but they do want to feel like if they've observed something, they can put it into an honest, independent mechanism to handle that, wherever I've talked with people. So I think the key is to simplify, and that goes to what you were saying. We have such a glut of information. typically, you know, if you talk to people, they're only going to grasp about 3-4 things. You know, so how can we condense this and give them the real keys? And that's the challenge. And that's the challenge everywhere. Every country has the same challenge.
So for that, the thing that scared me the most from your presentation was when you started out. The initial approach when you were trying to tackle some really big ticket issues of corruption, you were extremely vulnerable. Your position could have been eliminated fairly easily.
I could have been on.
You could, well, I mean, you know what, we laugh, but it's very possible that you could have been eliminated. Either you could have been politically neutralized or worse. So those are real concerns when trying to take this to scale. So we talk about the power of effectively an ombudsperson who takes complaints either via hotline, via email, however, and somehow transmits that to the elected officials and says, this is the area where you need to change. What about the power of protest? Because protest is really influential in securing your position. That's not an area that's discussed or expanded much in traditional civics education. Right. We're all outside the box now, so I mean, you know, we can toss, you know, how a bill becomes law. We're about real civics education.
Protest. I mean, really, it's so exciting, but so few people want to risk their position, their security to protest. And I admire the people that do throughout history. Truly, I do. Whenever I got really low about this whole thing, I would watch Gandhi again. I'd watch the whole movie and trying to squeeze the inspiration of how do you protest. And most people are not going to risk their jobs and their family security to protest. You know, so I think those people are few and far between. My hat goes off to them, but I don't know how we train people to do that or build them into that.
So that reciprocally makes your position even more important because you are the protest. So for the people who, for whatever reason, can't protest, you're essential for their having access to counter some of the negativity and the corruption associated with government. The issue is, to what extent does your position depend on the public's ability to protest? Because unless it's an election, an immediate election, they don't really have a response if funding is cut. They can't say, well, I'm going to force you, city council person, to fund this position. Well, there has to be some direct action. But I believe there was a question.
Oh, I was just, we've done high school ethics programs, and I am affiliated with the philosophy department here, which is, I'm an English teacher of 20 years in the classroom. And we have found, after several years, that engaging students in reasoning skills, and we've been using argument maps, which are visual and almost visceral. But we found that looking at ethics and through these reasoning maps builds immediate collaboration and, most excitingly, protest between two people and understanding that it's not going to reach an answer. And I just would hope that the Sapphire Institute or people would begin to look earlier at how to train people to engage in really substantive intellectual conversations. And we work with students from all over the place, and this has absolutely changed what we are doing. So I just throw that out there because we've seen it in action, and it's exciting.
Yeah,
I mean, you could do it with adults, and they would probably respond well to it.
That is exciting. I wish for all the people in this building and the educators to take on the people under 18. I'm taking the group that got into government that didn't get that training, so I've identified that group. But the better you guys do on addressing those issues as they're moving up, the easier it'll be, and we can affect more change that way.
We are here, of course, developing programs on civic education where a lot of doctoral students are working on a whole wide range of issues around civic education. And some of the points you're making are things that we students are being exposed to, the research on, the practice on, and hopefully it will have an effect long term. So things are happening, and not just here, but it's the kind of thing you're talking about, which sounds amazingly effective and exciting. this is the kind of thing that people are thinking about and working with. So you're not alone. Good. That's good news.
Come to Florida.
What sounds good.
I'll send a philosophy.
Can I ask you where you teach?
Oh, we have, we teach through the philosophy department, but we have out-of-school programs.
Well, you don't teach at a local school.
I teach at Lexington High School, but,
Yes. Because I wonder, you're fortunate to be able to do that, and yet there's so much pressure on inner city teachers, I'm not a teacher, but I know one, to just teach to these high-stakes tests, fill out the right bubble, and they're not being able to flourish in that, you know.
and interestingly, the Common Core proposal, I know that can be a very dirty phrase, but it does have a section on reasoning that I never thought of as an English teacher. So there is movement in those, in those tests, maybe to address some of these skills, but I don't know how the assessments are.
Are you talking about the PART test? This new test?
I'm not familiar with that. We've just looked at the Common Core standards and how they've got sections on reasoning, and I don't know how they're going to assess those.
The whole question of high-stakes testing, of course, it interweaves very much with all areas of education. As you said, the arts as well as civics. These are all questions which are being addressed, of course, across the board. Any more questions or comments? Margaret?
I really enjoyed your presentation and your remarks as well. Just to let you know that I work on a research project here. It's called the Good Project, and so you might have heard of it. So we have a number of different projects under there, but it's all looking at good person, good worker, good citizen. And a couple of things you mentioned really resonated in terms of knowledge that people need, but also the definitions that they're working with and the culture they're working in. And I was wondering a bit more about the training that you run with government workers. We have a Good Work Toolkit which is being used in other countries, and in another country the words that we were using didn't resonate at all because we were talking about good work, and it made the people feel that we were saying they were bad workers. And so we phrased it to be more about professional pride and, thinking about their profession and what makes for, a good person in this profession. What would a good, what makes a good ethical person within this profession? So just taking their experience and their understanding and their particular culture and using words which resonated. So thinking ethics, might just get that reaction of course I'm an ethical person, you don't need to tell me. But can you tell or talk a little bit, briefly maybe about the training that you do?
The question was about the type of training that I do, and also a concern about definitional problems we all have in training. Because when people come in and you say, this is training on ethics, I can tell you that's a loser thing to say, because you're already hitting up against everybody thinking they are ethical. So that's a loser. So I think structuring it, I think that the biggest success I've seen, the biggest switch, is people come in and they know that this is their required ethics training. I can't get around that because they are all required to take so many hours. But when I talk to them about the definition and about institutional corruption, that's something they haven't heard before, so they're interested in it. And then when you go into the psychological biases, I think that that's the most interesting thing that people gravitate towards. And one of the things that I use just as an example, since you have to get it pretty basic and punchy, because people, they can't listen to long, drawn-out things. One of the more successful things that I've used, and this goes in many different cultures, I've used this too, is the monkey fairness study. And so I talk to them about corruption and how corruption is basically, I look at you and say, well, we have the same job and you've got more money. You're getting money and I'm not getting this, and we're always comparing and we're always saying that this isn't fair, and that's really the core of corruption. So if you take a look at YouTube for the monkey fairness study, and you take a look at what you do when you train monkeys, that every time they give you a rock, they get a cucumber. Rock, cucumber. And then all of a sudden, you arbitrarily start taking some of the monkeys and you give them a grape for the same task. And go take a look at what the monkeys do when you do that. And so I talked to them about fairness, and I talked to them, I have the 3-dog theory of ethics, and I relate different concepts of ethics to 3 dogs. The lap dog, which is basically most ethics programs in the United States, the attack dog, which is what we fear, and the watchdog, which is what we want. I have elephants, I have the ethics elephant. So, I mean, the more, I think, for education, obviously, I mean, this is not just an ethics education, you know, that's why, see, education's in my blood, you know, it's my parents, what can I say? Because how do you make it engaging, or how do you pull them in and make them laugh? Instead of having it be serious, have it be fun. And I think maybe that's the key, that it has to be fun, and it has to, like, so that they can not make light of the subject, but that they can not take it so seriously that it's life and death, because then they're not learning anything.
I think what we must do is to make sure that on our website, the CNEI website, we have direct access to the information that the examples we've got. Can we do that?
Sure.
Right, we'll do that. Julia will fix it up. So we'll announce that people can actually connect to your exciting teaching materials, and
Sure.
as well as, of course, the doctor. That's
So,
right.
one more question. It's kind of provocative, and you'll enjoy it. So,
One more question.
I know. So usually people like to get rid of lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
Much of the issue with the current, with the lapdog approach, no, with the attack dog, actually, the lapdog and the attack dog approach are lawyers like to talk a lot. They like to, like you just said, display a list of statutes and regulations and go through them one by one. How much retraining would be necessary of lawyers, or more provocatively, would we need to train an entirely new subset of professionals to offer this ethics training?
Funny you should ask, because I just did a training through the International Municipal Lawyers Association last Friday with several hundred lawyers, trying to engage them in the concept of how do you take ethics education to all the people in the municipalities of the United States. And they were very interested, because they know when they stand up there that everyone's falling asleep. They see it. They see everybody texting on their phone. They know they're not doing a good job, but they're not trained to do that. So I think that they're going to embrace these different approaches. They already are.
Right. Thank you, Carla. Well, Carla has a brief video to show at the very end.
It's 1 minute, but I just wanted to wrap up with this. This is from the Los Angeles School District, and it's from their ethics training, and I just love it. I use it in my training. It doesn't quite relate to government ethics, but I love it anyhow, so I want to share it with you.
We're hoping there's sufficient volume, so I hope you can hear it. It's a little low. Oh, you got to do it. Where'd you come? Where'd you
Oh, here it is, right here.
That's good.
We might need a little louder. They've got great Los Angeles.
My name is Jenny, and in 8 years I'll be highly unethical. It will start with some white lies. Maybe I'll copy an assignment, then cheat on a test. Then maybe I'll lie on my resume to get my first job. You gotta start small and build your way up. I'll keep rationalizing and pushing the limits. You won't know what I'll lie about. In 20 years, I could be flying your plane or managing your pension. Will it matter if I don't think lying is a big deal? The thing is, adults in my life forget that I'm watching their every step. Look out for number 1, right?
That is excellent. Well, thank you so much, Carla. Thank you, Matthew, for, as always, being a superbly unusual but also brilliant lawyer. And we'll have this up on the site so people can watch it. Please tell your friends who weren't able to be in today to watch it, because it'll be out there and it's very educational, very relevant to everything we do.
Thank you.
So,
Your questions.